cancer. And I thought, how is it possible that the sun causes cancer? I've been writing about science and many other topics a long time, and I thought, well, if the sun caused cancer, humans wouldn't have evolved. We'd all be dead. So I went online and I started to really look into it, and I found out that, in fact, that is extremely erroneous, that the recommendation to eat foods to get my vitamin D was also erroneous. Foods have very low quantities of vitamin D. Only wild fish really has a good quantity of vitamin D, and also cod liver oil, but taking cod liver oil, which is how they solved this problem at the beginning of the 20th century, also has high levels of vitamin A. So I started really investigating and came up with this pretty extraordinary story about how the American medical community was getting the science of sun all wrong.
And was this doctor a dermatologist or a general practitioner?
No, this was a general practitioner, an internist, actually a very high-level internist, the head of the internist department at a local teaching hospital. And so the fact of him being so truly wrong about the contents of foods, what the sun does to your body, human interactions with the sun, how much sun is safe, really was one of those moments that spurred me to do the investigation. Now, I had no idea that I would find the depth of misinformation that I did, and especially with the American medical community, their shyness about really talking about sun exposure and the science of your skin, which gets into racial issues with, it's connected with what race you are, because what race you are is often connected to your skin color, but not always in America. It's a very complicated and controversial topic.
So race is one of the things that you highlight in your article. How are attitudes towards race in America interfering with the policy that we should have?
Americans are very, very touchy about race. The topic of race is actually a taboo in America. We don't think of it as a taboo because we talk about it all the time, but when it comes to something like giving medical advice that's linked to your race, doctors don't want to do it. We have a very difficult and ugly history of race relations in this country that really comes down to our history in this country of slavery, where blacks were imported into this country as slaves, and that goes back 200 years. That's why we have so many dark-skinned people living in this climate. Of course, Americans who came very early with the Pilgrims, they were white, and they aren't native to here either. So they also have issues with the sun when they are not in the latitude where your ancestors are from.
And that makes this question doubly important, doesn't it? Because we have so many darker-skinned people in this country, and they're not being well served by this recommendation to always stay out of the sun.
Well, it's very interesting because I'm dark-skinned for someone who is, quote, Caucasian. I mean, that's sort of the classification on the U.S. Census form. But if you actually look at me, I'm dark. And I have always identified as someone who is darker. It's just the facts of my skin color. It's actually one of the reasons I speak Spanish. Everyone would always speak to me in Spanish here in New York City, and so I learned Spanish. I'm like, okay, let's go with that flow. And when this doctor was looking at me, he didn't see my actual skin color, which is someone who's quite dark. And so as I began to look into it, and I even started using an app called D-Minder, which will actually take a photo of your skin color, and it will tell you what is your skin type. And then it will give you a recommendation of how much sun you should get, and also how much sun you need to create the right amount of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is created when the sun hits your skin. The body goes through a whole series of processes, including going, it has to hydroxylize, and I'm probably getting that word wrong, so don't get on me on that one. And then it turns it into actual active vitamin D. There's a circulating form, there's an active form, and it goes through the kidneys, and it changes it into vitamin D. Someone with dark skin actually needs more sun to make the same amount of vitamin D as someone with light skin. So I, in terms of this, came up as a skin type 3 to 4. There's something called the Fitzgerald scale of skin colors, and it goes from 1 to 6. So 1 would be a very pale, perhaps blonde, very fair person who would burn very, very quickly. A 6 would be a sub-Saharan African who has a really velvety, deep, dark tone. So I'm right in the middle. And so I need more sun than someone who has truly the darkest pigmented skin, and I don't burn. So that's part of my skin type. Someone who really doesn't burn puts me in a 3 to 4. And that's how you modulate how much sun you should get.
So we had a beautiful sunny weekend in New York this past weekend. Were you outside? Do you use sunscreen?
Oh, well,
are you with your smartphone sort of checking how long you should be outside and sort of measuring everything? Because that's a difficult thing to do.
Well, I think a really important thing about this article is that you need to know your own skin. And you need to make sure you do not burn. Out of all of the myths that are out there, that tanning itself is hazardous, that getting a tan is hazardous, it depends on your skin tone. It is absolutely crucial to never burn. All of the studies, all of the controversy about the sun and your skin type, it is extremely clear that burning is linked to melanoma and other kinds of skin cancer. So you need to really watch yourself. Now, I don't like to have the sun on my skin for a really long time because I find it uncomfortable, and I don't want to turn super dark brown because it also causes wrinkling. And the sun is also definitely related to lesser forms of skin cancer that are no fun. And those are called squamous cell and basal cell carcinoma are definitely linked to sun exposure. So I cover up when I go in the sun and I wear a big hat. You know, in 20 minutes a day, and D-Minder will tell me how much I need. And a high summer day, I'm going to get like 5,000, 6,000 IUs of vitamin D, and that is way more than you need on a daily basis.
In just 20 minutes?
Absolutely. On my skin tone.
Mm-hmm. So one of the most surprising facts in your article was that chronic exposure to the sun reduces your rate of melanoma. But there's a tension there because what does chronic mean? Someone like myself has sort of a binary reaction to the sun. It's either nothing or I burn.
Oh.
So if I'm trying to get chronic exposure and reduce my rates of melanoma, how do I know what's chronic? How do I know what's enough?
I think all of the experts are extremely clear that you should not go out and seek the sun in order to do anything, that tanning itself is bad. And so that's sort of the bottom line. When they say chronic sun, I think that term can be easily misinterpreted. It means on a daily, normal basis. In terms of melanoma rates, and this is science of the last 10 years, there has been a lot of cutting-edge science, a lot of it coming out of Australia. They have the highest melanoma rate in the world, 2 times anywhere else, minimum, and possibly higher in other places with low melanoma rates, but it's definitely 2 times higher than in America. And they have really forged the forefront of this science. So what the latest research is showing is that it's not sun exposure itself, it's the burns. And that having high levels of vitamin D and having regular sun exposure every day is definitely protective of melanoma. Okay, but for us who work in offices, it's hard to get daily, regular sun exposure and a natural tan. Meaning, if I go out every day, let's say I weed my garden every day for an hour, I'm going to slowly build up a natural tan. And that is going to take me through the seasons. As the sun gets hotter and hotter, the UV intensity gets hotter in the summer, in the high peak summer, that tan is going to get darker, day by day by day. Okay, as the sun wanes, as winter and fall are coming, the tan is going to start to naturally fade. But that's not how we live today. We suddenly go all out on the weekend and do 3 or 4 hours, and you're going to burn. So I think that's what chronic means, is daily, natural, following and tracking the seasons like the rest of the animals do.
I mean, you use the word normal, and I think normal is a really interesting word in this context because what is normal? I mean, you talk about the evolutionary past that we have in the article, so that's one definition of normal, and we're so far away from that kind of lifestyle that, you know, going to get sun on purpose seems like it could be a correction towards normal. If I read the article and I decide to get normal sun exposure, what should I do? What does that mean?
I think normal, well, the term normal, as we know, is not a scientific term.
Right.
So maybe we could say natural, or maybe we could say in the pattern of our ancestors before the rise of modern culture brought us indoors, before we spent all day in an office indoors. So let's go back to, let's say, the pattern of people who were farmers and talk about that. And could someone say were humans farmers for that long? Or hunter-gatherers? We were hunter-gatherers certainly for longer than we were farmers. There's going to be a lot of daily sun exposure. But people evolved at certain latitudes. My ancestors did not evolve at this latitude. They came, there's a lot of travels there.
Well, none of ours did, really.
Exactly. So certainly daily, certainly not burning, because if you're building natural exposure, you're not burning.
So if I work in an office and I don't see the sun, I go to work at 8 a.m. and I go home at 8 p.m. in the winter, and I go to a tanning salon because, for 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day to get some sun. Is that bad? There's this contradiction there in the advice that we're getting.
Okay, now you're getting, I think, into one of the most controversial areas of the story. And it's really a whole separate topic about tanning salons. However, in looking at the research that I have seen, all of the case-controlled studies that look at tanning salons find a link between melanoma and tanning salons. Now, if you really look through the data and you say, why is that? There's a couple of things that we can pull out. First of all, people who are the highest risk for melanoma go to tanning salons. Those are the palest, whitest people. Those are the last people in the world who should ever go to a tanning salon because they often burn. Tanning salons are not well regulated. They have equipment that is not run by medical professionals. People report, and these are in large-scale longitudinal studies, that they burn in salons. And it is that burn that is always linked to cancer and to skin cancer. So I am not a doctor. I am a journalist. I'm an investigative journalist, and I look at the data. So I would say in order to give advice on that, you'd have to really talk to the people who are absolutely the cutting edge on that. One of the leading, pioneering vitamin D researchers in the world is Michael Hollick, Dr. Michael Hollick, up at Boston University Medical Center. He has done a lot of the primary research that people use in terms of how the skin makes vitamin D, what are the levels, all of that kind of stuff. And he does support modest, controlled use of ultraviolet medical level devices in the home.
He got fired.
Yes, funny thing. He did get fired for making that recommendation to a dermatologist. There's big pushing between the endocrinologists and the dermatologists. Dermatologists are in charge of the skin. Endocrinologists are in charge of the hormone system. And vitamin D is a type of hormone. And so they are really concerned with the importance of keeping up proper and sufficient vitamin D levels, which control bone and muscle health. The reasons for osteoporosis, osteomalacia, all of those kinds of things, there is no question that deficient vitamin D contributes to musculoskeletal problems.
Yeah, it's just kind of mind-boggling that something that seems a simple question as sun exposure is still so badly misunderstood and kind of wrong in the year 2014. I mean, how do we understand that, and why is Australia seemingly getting it right and we're not?
Australia has taken a very pragmatic approach. When I did this article, I was interviewing a lot of top experts, world-known experts in Australia, which of course meant that I had to call them at midnight because they're 15 hours ahead. And they do not have the racial taboos in Australia that we have here. So, and I mean, that's just one factor. They also have nationalized health care so that their medical community is much more independent of cosmetic company influence than here in the United States. The cosmetic industry in this country is a billion-dollar sunscreen industry, and they definitely have ties with medical doctors, especially dermatologists, and this is having an influence on the recommendations that are being given in this country. In Australia, they're more independent, and they, 10 years ago, started a series of meetings where they brought together all of their leading medical experts. These guys and women all sat down. They had the nutritionists, they had the endocrinologists, they had the skin doctors, they had the cancer experts, because there is definitely a growing body of evidence suggesting that low vitamin D is linked to higher rates of other kinds of cancers, because vitamin D is seen in the laboratory, is actually has an anti-cancer causing effect. This is extremely contentious. The Institute of Medicine here in the United States has reviewed this evidence, and they have found that it is not sufficient to make recommendations based on it. And in fact, in Australia, the leaders there reviewed that evidence as well, and they also agreed that in terms of saying that higher levels of vitamin D fights other kinds of cancers like breast cancer, prostate cancer, there is not yet sufficient evidence to make that conclusion. However, everyone all across the globe agrees that vitamin D levels are connected to muscular skeletal health, not in dispute.
So how do I know if I have a vitamin D deficiency? Not a severe one, but a mild one that needs attention.
Well, I found mine out by having a blood test. It's now, within the last few years, it's become part of the regular medical tool chest. This is relatively new. I hadn't had a test ever before. I'd never really heard of it.
Did you think you were sick?
No, I didn't think I was sick.
So you didn't have any problems you were going to the doctor to address?
Yes, I did have some problems. Yes, I did. But no doctor had connected it to vitamin D deficiency.
So what do we look out for?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what my symptoms were. The one that is not contested in the medical literature is that I was having weird pains on the bottom of my feet. Like my bones hurt. And I found sometimes that I wasn't walking properly. I felt that way. Now, I'd never used the term waddle. No. But, in fact, in the medical literature, as I started to investigate this, I actually saw the word waddle. And this, okay, I'm not admitting that I waddle at all, but it felt like a funny gait. Now, when I went to this very doctor and he said, do you have any issues? I said, well, my feet are hurting me. And he said, oh, you must have plantar fasciitis. Now, this guy didn't examine my feet. And he said, you should do stretching exercises for your feet. Okay. Another thing, again, personally, everyone has their own level of symptoms, is that I have got adult onset asthma. Now, this is not the forefront, and that was about 3-4 years ago. This is not in the forefront of the literature. And I have to tell you that the American medical community has not examined closely the link between vitamin D and respiratory illness. However, if you go back in the literature, back to the 30s and 40s, when they were really looking at this stuff, when vitamin D deficiency was still in the forefront of people's mind, there are some case-controlled studies, especially out of Tibet, where they were giving kids there, they get like no sun there at all. They had tremendous deficiencies. They gave vitamin D, and they had a marked reduction in respiratory illness. And I have to tell you, since I have started getting sun, and supplements in the winter are absolutely crucial. Right now, we are talking to you from New York. It's latitude 43 north. In the winter, between about November and March, the sun is not high enough in the sky to give you one ray of ultraviolet sun. You will have a deficiency in the winter if you do not take supplements. So I started doing that, and I have to say, all of these symptoms went away. I mean, now I'm a science writer. If you start talking to me about toxic cleanses and stuff like that, I'm going to investigate that, within an inch of its life. And this, in my own experience, and frankly, dozens of people I spoke to, is based on science. So for me, the respiratory issues aren't gone entirely, but they're substantially reduced. I go mountain climbing, do things like that. I'm back to my old self. I threw away the inhalers. My feet are fine. I do not have any problem. And people who I spoke to discussed exactly the same kinds of things with these same kinds of symptoms.
So your profession served you well here.
It did, and it got me really good medical care. The wonderful thing about this article for Nautilus doing so much investigation with people around the world is I had the privilege of speaking to the top medical experts and researchers in the world to find out really what is really the story with sun exposure. How much do I need? How much can I get? Am I going to get cancer if I go in the sun? And I learned all of that from the top people in the world, which my medical doctor didn't know. And so you have to go read the article in Nautilus to really get the latest science.
You should send the article to him, just as a kind of a,
I should. It's funny. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll get back to you on that.
You'll become a Nautilus reader.
Yeah, absolutely. We want more readers, don't we?
That's right. I want to talk to you a bit about SPF. So I was shocked to discover that a T-shirt has SPF under 10, and a wet T-shirt is under 5. And when you go to the drugstore, you see 70. So that's like wearing a half dozen or a dozen T-shirts. What's going on with SPFs? Where will the numbers stop? And what SPF do you buy?
That is a really tough question for people. SPF means sun protection factor. All I can do is respond to what I have found in my research. I did not research SPF, however, and looking at many, many dozens of medical studies, most of which did not make it into this story. This is just the very thin tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of controversy about sunscreens, lotions that are marked SPF. Okay, I will only tell you that what I do is I wear a hat and long sleeves. That's what I do. I do not trust sunscreens. However, when I am going out for a full day of hiking, which I do often, I do put it on my face and I do put it on my hands.
What do you mean you don't trust sunscreens? You don't think they'll work?
I want to go back to what is a more natural relationship to the sun. Okay, the fact is that in America, for many years, they only had UVB protection in sunscreens. Okay, so that's the ultraviolet B. That is a particular wavelength. They did not have UVA. So the actual facts of what happened was people didn't burn, and they went and spent way more time in the sun than they would have been able to do naturally without anything on their skin. Now, I happened to be in a diner yesterday, and I saw a woman with so many wrinkles on her face that I was startled. I was like, how can someone have so many wrinkles on their face? Well, I have to tell you, it's something that has been noted in the medical literature because UVA causes those wrinkles. And this extraordinarily wrinkled face that you're seeing, there are people who believe, scientists who've written about that, believe that that is a result of a couple of decades of sunscreen that only had UVB, prevented people from burning, and they then spent hours and hours in the sun, which is more than is healthy, way more than is healthy. So to me, you should be really using a hat. In Australia, I want to tell you, the country that is absolutely at the forefront of sun protection, a hat is now part of their children's school uniform. Those kids in their summer, are not allowed outside without a hat on. And that's absolutely a good policy. They also use a lot of sunscreens. So I think using these both is really the best policy. And in terms of the T-shirt, I don't know what they're saying about T-shirts, but you really want to cover up. I guess for you should see, are you tanning under your T-shirt? Look at it. Just see, where's your tan line? If you're not tanning under your T-shirt, who gave that T-shirt a rating? Was it a sunscreen company? What is the monetary interest behind rating a T-shirt 5? I'm suspicious of that. I would want to see who rated that T-shirt.
It's interesting because you said that you've covered business and were a business reporter, and now you're doing science as well. And so this story is really a combination of those two threads. Are they very different to cover, and how do you cover them at the same time and do justice to each?
Well, my background, I come out of the Chicago Tribune where I was a national correspondent. I have covered many, many diverse topics. I've covered Hollywood, and business and art come together in Hollywood. And I think in the American community in science and medicine, that really is where business and science come together. And you always have to look at all aspects of a story. What is the interest behind making a claim? Who is making that claim? It has been shown very definitively that when there is a private company that pays for a medical study, that, funny thing, results tend to skew towards the person who paid for the study. And that's why the term double blind is so crucial in science. And that means that the researchers themselves don't know who's getting what. And so they are not allowed to they don't bring unconscious, subconscious biases to their results. So these, just for the public, looking at information, learning to really read data, where the data come from. Was it a double-blind study? If it was what is called a case-controlled study, it's not the same level as a double-blind, but case studies are very important too. For example, the melanoma research that I mentioned that comes out of Wisconsin, a woman named Deanne Lazovich, who is an absolutely top-notch researcher. Case control is when they took people who had melanoma, and that was in the state registry. And then they found people who were exactly similar to them but didn't have melanoma, and they compared them. So they could then try to pull out, doing very complex regression analysis, okay, what are the factors here that led to this melanoma? And one of the reasons that her study is so terrific is that she actually looked at the risk of your skin color type. People who have blonde hair, and especially redheads, have a much higher risk of skin cancer, melanoma. And so she was trying to pull out, okay, if we pull out their higher risk for having red hair, what really are the factors here? And she was able to pull out that the factor is the burns. The factor is the burns in the suntan salons. So that's a sort of beginning way to think about the studies that you're looking at. Everyone should be able to look at these studies for themselves.
If you add up where the money is in the equation, you have the sunscreen industry and I guess also the vitamin D industry on the side of, protection and staying out of the sun. But on the other side, you have nobody. Is that correct? I mean, it's free to just go out in the sun.
It's a funny thing. It's a funny thing that you mentioned. It's free to go out in the sun. So, and by the way, that is something that the Australians mentioned. They said, hey, we do not want to have recommendations, medical recommendations that forces people to buy a supplement when they can go outside and get the sun for free. And I think that is something where the American dermatological community really needs to think about it, because they had a very controversial study that came out recently, promoted and done by their top, what they call ethnic dermatologists. These are dermatologists who deal with what they call people of color, meaning people with darker skin. The term people of color is not used in Britain. It's not necessarily used in other countries, so that is very much an American term. And they are recommending sunscreen for even the darkest people. And you have to ask, what's the monetary interest there? In order to do that, they're both promoting supplements and promoting sunscreen as part of that recommendation. Now, if you've looked at a bottle of sunscreen, you know how expensive that is to really load up on that enough that you need to go into the sun. So this could be hundreds of dollars a year, when with proper controlled sun exposure, you can get all your vitamin D for free.
So I guess one of the group of people for whom the message is strongest out of your article might be dark-skinned people, because they're not being well served by this policy. What would you want to tell them, as we're entering the summer season, to do?
Dark-skinned people also need to know their own skin type. Okay, here in America, darker skin people come from many, many different nationalities. They come from many different places. African Americans do have a mix of Caucasian blood in them, and so there's a real mix of what the Caucasian and the African, and depending on the actual color of their skin and their actual reaction to the sun, they can burn very much. And again, there's so many different skin tones that are under the category African American. So you have to look in the mirror and say, what's my skin tone? You have to know yourself and say, do I burn? If you're sensitive to the sun, don't do that. Don't burn. If you can go out in the sun and not burn, then you're fine. Daily exposure is the crucial thing. To get daily exposure where you feel comfortable and you do not, no blistering, nothing like that. And to just add, there's one source in my story, Ophelia Zadzi, who is a top ethnic dermatologist in Britain, and she is herself from Ghana. And she brought an important perspective to the story, and that is the African perspective from Africa. And she said, in Africa, people behave, quote, normally in the sun. There's that word again, normal. And for them, that means no sunbathing. They think it is ludicrous to go to the beach and lie in the sun. They can't even imagine it. And they laugh at Westerners who come and lie in the sun, where invariably they're going to burn or turn some weird shade. So you have to find your way to what is normal for you. It's not an easy answer.
It's a complex issue.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for the article. I mean, you did, I think, a great service to people who read it, and I encourage readers to go to the comment section where you're participating and answering questions, and ask a question, put a comment in. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. I really want to thank Nautilus. It's such tremendous editing. My editor, Alina Zeldovich, and you, Michael Siegel, really just a fantastic teamwork, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.